Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to this 10th edition of the ISLA Festival, the Irish, Spanish and Latin American Festival in Ireland, organised by the Instituto Cervantes in association with the Latin American embassies in Ireland and supported by Dublin UNESCO City of Literature. My name is Catherine Dunne. I'm a writer of fiction and non-fiction. And with me today, joining me in this conversation, is David Trueba. Welcome, David.
Hello.
I'm really pleased that you are able to join me as part of this special edition of the ISLA Festival. And before we begin our conversation, I'd just like, first of all, to tell our audience a little bit about you and your work. David Trueba moves seamlessly between being a novelist, a screenwriter, and a film director. His movie, Vivir es fácil con los ojos cerrados, which he both wrote and directed, was longlisted for the Academy Awards in 2015. It went on to win no fewer than 3 Goya Awards, the Spanish equivalent of the Oscars, for Best Film, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. He has also written several highly successful novels, all critically acclaimed and with wide readerships. Among them, the completely compelling Tierra, campos, beautifully translated into English by Rahul Berry, with the title Rolling Fields. He also has a memoir called Ganarse, vida, in which he recalls episodes from his childhood and adolescence. It's both tender and funny and full of wise observations about family life. So, David, may I now invite you to read an opening section from Rolling Fields?
Thank you very much. I'll do it very happy, because as you have said, the translation of the book, which is always very big problem to the books to travel. In this case, it was a pleasure to work with Rahul Berry and to read the words in English of my Spanish novel. As you say, Tierra de Campos is an impossible to translate title, and so it was changed for Rolling Fields in English. And so I'm gonna read just the beginning of the novel. We all know how it ends. We all know how it ends, and it doesn't end happily. It's a funny story, this one, because we all know the outcome, but not the plot. We're both all-seeing and blind, wise and ignorant. This is at the root of that melancholy we all share, the vague feeling that makes us weep on overcast days, that keep us awake in the middle of the night, and unsettles us when we have to wait too long for a loved one to return. It's at the root of excessive human cruelty and unexpected human kindness. In a way, it's at the root of everything, knowing the ending, but not how we get there. This game has strange rules no child will ever accept, because children don't want you to tell them how the story ends. They don't yet realize that knowing the ending is the only way to enjoy what comes before. Sorry for my English.
Oh, your English is excellent. Thank you very much. That's lovely. I have to say, I really loved this book. I couldn't put it down. I mean, Rolling Fields, I just thought was a terrific title for it, because certainly the reader is rolled along from page to page. It's absolutely unputdownable. But what I found so interesting initially was one of the critics on the front cover says, effortless, fast-paced and light-hearted, tremendously good. Now, I certainly agree with tremendously good, but light-hearted made me stop for a moment, because while yes, there's a great deal of humor and wry observations throughout the novel, I found that you use humor actually to excavate things which are significantly darker. So is that the purpose of humor for you in this novel?
I think it's my purpose, but I think it's the labor of humor in the long story of literature. I think especially in the European tradition, the humor has represented the possibility to say things as they are, and to express feelings that you cannot express in any other way, and also to have a critical vision of yourself and the power around you, and all things sacred around us. And for me, in that way, humor is like a wing of sincerity, and especially in a moment of where literature, I think, is very um, I don't know, it's in danger of being a too emotional or too sentimental kind of profession, and I think the humor maintains the spirit of criticism, the spirit of philosophy, and the spirit of human observation, but not going too far in terms of sentimentality or romanticism. So humor is like a safe, like a life vest, something that is very useful.
Yeah, because I found, I mean, some of the phrases that struck me in particular when I said I was completely compelled by the book and I was rolling along with it very happily, and I would be laughing or smiling, you know, at some of the exploits of the character, and then I'd come up against something like humor is an act of revenge against sadness. Or the other one was, when love comes to an end, no one understands a thing because we can't see that death has just delivered another one of its installments. And that literally brought me up short. You know, I had to stop reading and go back over the phrase again. I think that's one of the joys of the book, the way it carries the reader along with a great deal of joy and lightness, and then suddenly we reach the point that you want to make, which is it's full of all sorts of interesting observations like that. One of the characters that I really enjoyed was Gus, who in the novel, the narrator's best friend. Just such a completely exuberant character. Now, I lived in Spain during the time of Franco, so I wasn't there in 1984. I was back in Ireland, but I didn't know that kind of alternative world that Gus inhabits, because when I was there, very similar to Ireland at that time, actually, Spain was filled with a great deal of silence. So can you talk to me a little bit about the silences that would have broken in the wake of Franco's death?
Yeah, it is a very, and it is always very difficult to explain that to the young people of Spain, because they all know a country that is very open and very liberal in some ways, especially in the way the people live their own lives. But they forget that we come from a long time of repression, and a long time of identification of Catholicism in a very radical way as the only way to live our lives. And we all have, in a long time, a very Catholic education, which is not bad at all, but in terms of that silence that you were talking about, it was a repression for all, especially kind of interest in other particular ways of living their own sexuality, and this repression was equivalent also in our lives to not knowing anything about it. We all were educated by the first women or couples we have in our life, because we were such ignorance that it was ridicule, and it was a very humor in the observation of our sexuality. But when I was at school, when Franco died, the things changed very fast. It was a very strange moment where, because in Spanish transition, there was not a rupture, a radical rupture or a breakup with the Franco government, but it was like what we call the transition. It was a change that it was slow in some terms and very fast in others, but we maintained some of the power of the Franco government. Also, we maintain or in democracy parties that represented a little bit the side of this right Catholic dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, people was looking for freedom. So nobody wanted to be called censor or to be called Francoist. Mm-hmm. So everyone was very involved in let the people live free. And it was like, it was a very, very funny moment, because we have 10 years of complete freedom as young and kids to live and experiment life, culture, and new expressions. And so you bump into people that open your eyes, and they were very, very interesting, because they were not like it happens today, imitating models they were seeing at TV or they were seeing in society, but they were inventing their own models. And so that's what I wanted to portray in this character and this Goose in the novel, the guy who's a close friend in the rock band with the protagonist of the book. And because he's the kind of person that is inventing his own model, he's inventing his own life. And that was something that happened at the end of the 70s and beginning of 80s in Spain. I was born in 69, so I was 10, 12, 13 years old at that time. And it was very exciting. And when I remember those times, I had, the most recognition to these people, because they were suffering in the inside, but in the outside, they were celebrating, they were trying to be the people they wanted to be, they feel to be.
Yeah, it's kind of, I remember going back a few years later, I was back here in the late 1970s, and I remember going back in the mid 80s and being completely astounded. The country had even changed visually. The magazines or books that were on display, I would never have seen when I was there in the 70s. And I'm just wondering, when you came of age, because certainly the Spanish cinema that I would have seen in the early 70s would not have been, it didn't even interest me then. So I'm just wondering, how long did the transition into the arts take? Like, when did things begin to change there and become, like Gus, become their own original selves rather than following an old and boring pattern?
Well, in your presentation, you talk about one of my movies that is called Vivir es fácil con los ojos cerrados. It's called Living is Easy with Eyes Closed.
With your eyes closed,
in English, is the first verse of Strawberry Fields Forever, the song of Lennon, because John Lennon plays a part in that movie. And it's a movie that takes place in the south of Spain in 1966. So 10 years before Franco's death. And for me, in my opinion, and that was, present in that movie, and it's present in Rolling Fields in the novel too, is the sensation that the change was not completely political change. It was a change that started before, especially in families and schools. It was the capacity of some teachers, some of them, just some of them, and especially some mothers in our society that started to change society from inside and started to change society from the young kids. And that happens to be like in a moment also that Spain became very, like a country very known for the tourist reasons. So people were starting to come to Spain to enjoy the sun, to enjoy the beach. And those people came from England, from Ireland, from Sweden, from France. And though that kind of people help it a lot, because they bring some new music, they bring some new books and photographs and culture and music. And, and the Spaniards started to see themselves as Europeans at the same time as free people. But that change for me started at mid-60s. And so I was like the young child of a family of 8. And for me, the great political and cultural revolution happened at home, not outside. And it happened because my older brothers were listening to music and seeing movies that were not the movies that authorities wanted us to see, and it was a change in our minds and in
Yeah.
everything.
So it was a kind of a perfect storm, wasn't it? I mean, political
Mhm.
change happened at the same time as cultural change, and familial change was beginning. And I think, just to move on to Ganarse la vida, just
Yeah.
for a few minutes, I just, one of the things which has become popular here in recent years is what we call misery memoir.
Yeah.
Where people, my life was much harder than yours. Nobody had a harder life than mine. And they're really, sometimes they can be very difficult to make your way through because there's no joy at all in them, no sense of redemption or being able to move forward in your life. But this, it's a very different book, obviously, from Rolling Fields, but it was equally compelling. And what I found about it was so incredibly forgiving. I mean, you paint your parents with faults and all, although your mother does sound to have been an absolutely extraordinary woman. And if you're talking about the changes beginning at home, I could certainly see in her mothering of her 8 children, and often in being, if you like, the counterweight to your father's sometimes very strict method of keeping the children in control. She was a lovely balance to all of that. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you think the greatest gift is that your parents have given you?
Well, I think the greatest gift is the way they look at the world. They were not, they were very young when the civil war started in the 30s in Spain, and even my father participated in the war as a young soldier, but they never transmit us a rancor or a way of seeing life as opposite sides. They were very grateful to the possibility to have a family and to a little bit escalate in the social steps of Spain, and they were also a thing that today I think is the most important in comparison with a family today. They thought the culture and the education was the only way for a poor or medium class family to have a happy life. And they transmit us that if you go to university, it was like, if you go to the Olympics, for making a metaphor of sports, which are very important today, the sports, the way we live, but not the culture anymore and not the education anymore. And for them, that generation, education was the first thing, was the most important thing. And they put all the effort on that, even if they never spent a single day of their lives in a school, because they didn't have the chance to have it. So, but I agree with you when you started to pose this question, because I didn't make any interview to present or any promotion to present Ganarse la vida, this book in Spain, because I didn't want to talk about suffering and miserability. I didn't want to get into this competition of I was poor, but I was poorer, and I'm the result of an effort, or I have a trauma for that. I only wanted to pay homage to that generation and not ourselves, not to think that we are the most important thing in the world. We are the consequence of people that put some energy in our lives. And I think that the great revolution starts always in family,
in the home.
And I think it's it can be also the generator of trauma, the generator of violence, but in the same way, family can be like a kind of paradise and a sensation of that you can do everything, and they can push you to fight for your dreams. And in my case, I thought my parents had this mission and this way, even if, for instance, my father was a very religious, authoritarian, machist kind of person, and my mother in some terms was too soft and too convenient in some ways, but they had this strong feeling of you can do it, and don't worry, and don't look at the others. You are not in a competition with the others, you are in a competition with yourself.
Yeah. And I think what came across from them as well was how easy it would have been to have been the opposite. And this is not just referring to your parents, although in their case, for example, I mean, not only had your father been in the war, but I think your grandfather had been assassinated. So, you know, that could have been a seam of anger or bitterness or resentment that could very easily and understandably have been sown by your parents in you children, but that's not what happened. And I found that ability to transcend what had happened to them to give their children a better life was just incredibly admirable. And they were extraordinarily hardworking, as well as, you know, physically hardworking, as well as everything else, which is so, I think it's something very reminiscent of that generation in Ireland as well. One of the things which struck me was I actually felt like I was in a movie walking down through your apartment, the way you described all of the different rooms and where the kitchen was and where you slept and where your brother slept. And a phrase came to mind from the writer Margaret Yourcenar, who talks about the emotional storage that writers lay down very early on, and then it's something that we can go back to again and again. So is this description of your childhood, is it something that informs your work both on the screen and on the page? Is it something you return to for that kind of emotional storage that you built up during those years?
Yeah, obviously, I think so, and I think it's a way, in the way you write and in the way you film, it is you portray what do you think of society and what do you think of the people. You know, I think I have a compassion for the characters in my novels and in my films. You know, even if they are wrong or they are doing something that is wrong, they are always have kind of possibility to go the right way, and just with a little bit of effort by themselves in most of the cases, because I'm not the kind of person who thinks society is guilty of everything. I think in a lot of times we are guilty of everything, and we have to fight our instincts to be a better person and to be useful to the others. And yeah, of course, I suppose this way to look for others is in my childhood and in this type of family, and especially
in your DNA.
Yeah, in my DNA, exactly.
Yeah. And what about the difference of working in the two mediums? You know, whether which do you find comes more easily, or do they both come with a deal of difficulty, the visual world and the written world? Do you have a favorite between the two of them, or do they respond in different ways to the themes which you want to talk about?
In my case, they are natural professions and natural approaches to similar things. I feel as a writer and a film director, as the difference that the people in the audience, you know, like a reader or a spectator, experiments. The difference of the medium, the difference of the technique, the difference of the kind of impact you can arrive to get and to put in minds of the people that are reading your book or looking at your movie. But in my case, they are separate things, tasks. And I'm always like, when I'm writing a book, I'm thinking that I will be better if I'm directing a movie, because I will be with this a team working with me, helping, having the actors to give the face and to do the effort in the screen and not me. But when I'm doing the movie, I'm thinking all the time, oh my God, I would like to be at home writing by myself, not worrying about the state of mind of this actor or this producer or this money or this weather. And, it's like a combination of two pleasures and two miseries that maintains my passion for both tasks.
Okay. One of the things which struck me as well in both books, and I'm reading Learning to Lose at the moment as well, memory comes across as quite a strong theme. There was one very funny part where you remember a jingle from your childhood. Tomando leche collantes, los chicos se hacen gigantes. He said you can remember that silly thing, you know, if you drink this, if children drink this milk, they will grow up to be big and strong. You see, you remember that kind of a jingle from your childhood, but yet other really important things we forget. So I just thought that it was a wonderful observation, because I think that happens to all of us. So how do you make those memories then into something significant? You talk about basura, you talk about the rubbish, which we all remember, when perhaps we should remember more important things. So, and the way in which different people will remember the same event. I mean, sometimes you can discuss a family dinner, for example. I've done this with my brothers.
Yeah.
We were both there. We were all around the table, but my memory of what they said or my parents said is very different from their memory, and yet it was the same event. So what does memory give you in your work? What kind of riches or added dimension does it give?
Well, I think my brothers and sisters, they used to say to me, please write some more books about our family and our souvenirs, because we don't remember that. We have they keep forgetting a lot of things, and I'm trying to maintain memory alive as a muscle and something that I practice, because I think even in creation, in writing, you need memory, but not always memory to be biographical or to portray things that you have seen, but to have a model for how you develop a new plot or a new character in a movie or in a film. You need the memory. I used to say that we, even in dreams, we are incapable of dreaming without memory, because all the sensations, that something even strange or new, an association that is surreal, it's the memory that puts order in all that and give us the weapons to have a feeling on that, and so that's why memory is so important. And also losing memory is so dramatic for our lives and the lives of the people we love. And I used to talk, as you say, as neurological garbage, to make an explanation of how it's possible that we remember these, ads in TV or these stupid jingles in the radio, but we don't remember even moments of our life that is, that happened that year, really? I didn't remember like that. Or my son tell me, or my daughter, you don't remember when you told me that? And no, because it was not important for you. So memory is always like qualification of souvenirs. It gives you the hierarchy of things, and it's important to us. Yeah, memory. I think even if we do a science fiction and we do stories that happens in the future, we need memory to write about that, because we don't know what is the future if we don't know what it was, how it was before.
Yeah.
It's
and your memory of I thought that the bit about the cinema was really funny. By the way, why was that cinema called the Griffith? Do you know, which is an Irish surname?
Oh, it was called Griffith for in homage to the David Griffith, the pioneer of cinema in the United States, which is now very problematic memory for the States, because he did this movie called The Birth of a Nation, that is considered a very racist movie. But at the same time, he was the author of Intolerance and Broken Blossoms. So he was, and the cinema have his name in Spain, which it was not an easy name for a Spanish guy to say, the Cine Griffith. But it was this beautiful cinema with runs 2 movies every day, and it was for me like a school. Yeah, and you were said on some occasions you went 6 times.
Oh yeah, same movie 6 times. I mean, that kind of freedom is wonderful. And the other, that you have a lovely line which I agree with absolutely. You talk about just a little bit of sadness about, you call it the loss of the street in today's childhood. You know, where we as children, our mother certainly, and I'm sure yours sounds similar, the door was opened, you were sent out to play, and then you came back in when it was time for dinner or time to go to bed or whatever. But now that whole, the whole fear that there is around the street, and also the prevalence of screens and sedentary activities for children, but even apart from the physical, what is it you think children have lost when they don't have that kind of street activity that we did.
Yeah. Well, it is, I think it is one of the strongest contradictions in our way of life, because when we arrive to a society that it's kind of sophisticated and developed in terms of economics, we also lose the qualities of a poorer society, which is the open doors and the life at the streets with no sense of danger, because it is the only possibility to have a life, and it is something that we see when we travel to Africa or Latin America. We see these kind of countries in social and economic development, that they have the strong qualities we had in the 60s and 70s in a country like Spain, and it's like a kind of nostalgia of this freedom and this kind of life for young people. And I'm sure that the future of creation, especially artistic creation, is coming from those countries, because it's normal. You cannot create art in a very pacifical and beautiful society when everything is controlled. You have to have some parts of the society under control, and I think the street means that, and it is very tough to think about it, because it's one of the contradictions. We don't arrive to have the quality of life, even if we have all the money. And it's because, it's like saying to anyone, how many children of a rich family has become a great painter, a great writer, a great filmmaker in the history of life? 5%?
Yeah, very few.
The rest, the 95% of the rest of creators, they come from families of middle class or poor class, and they have this kind of approach to life, and this is important as a society to make a reflection on that.
Your own family was quite extraordinary in that regard, in the creative output that came from that apartment where all of you lived together, and your love of your cinema, of your art, of your reading. You had a lovely phrase where you said, "I lost my faith, my religious faith, and found reading instead." So, did it take the place of any some sort of fundamental belief which we had? Ireland was very similar to Spain in those years, and there was the rigid Catholic education and so on. And certainly my experience would have been very similar. When I started to read seriously, or left home for the first time, that kind of faith at the first time it's tested, it sort of disappeared, because it was only something that I'd inherited. It wasn't really mine. So what do you think it was within your family circumstances that produced that creative output, both certainly in you and certainly in at least one other of your siblings? Why did that happen in that atmosphere, do you think?
Well, I think the most important thing happens when my older brother became a doctor. He was a doctor, and he became like an authority at home, even bigger authority than my parents, because he introduced the scientific approach of about everything in our family. And one of the things that happens is that this religious approach was it was changing all the time, because it was a new generation, and they weren't looking for all the answers in the religious, but they were looking for the answers also in scientific terms and cultural terms and intellectual terms. So I was very young, and I started to question all the things, and I didn't have a very articulate answer in my religion teachers. They were people that they were, very honest, but not very prepared, because for a long time, I think religion has not made the effort as they made at the beginning of religion to try to understand society and to put religion in very close to society and to do an intellectual explanation of that. And so that was abandoned for 300 years of new philosophy, where religious philosophy not enter in the discussion, because they didn't want to negotiate their dogmas or their approach to life. So what happened is, it was in a lot of societies, very religious societies, what happened is that the new generation was not interpelled by religion, And so that changed it. And it's true. I was 8 or 9 years old, and I started to ask questions to teachers, and teachers, they didn't know how to answer, and that was a problem. So I started to read, and I started to read novels, and I started to construct a new kind of universe for myself. And it was a kind of hope also, to explain yourself, to try to play a role in life, which is, I think, the most important part of religion in the life of persons. Like to have the feeling that even in your intimacy or in your non very represented or relevant life, you have a part in the universe, you have a part in the story of your country and in the story of the planet. And I think around intellectual culture and education, you try to understand what is your part and what is makes important that you are in the world, which is the explanation that we need when we are 10 years old, why we are here and what for, what is the sense.
You have it, I mean, Ganarse la vida, its direct translation would be, earning your living, but you have a deeper explanation for choosing the title. Can you just tell me a little bit about that, because it really resonated with me?
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, earning your life is. I don't know. I suppose in every language is a very common expression. Like you ask someone, why do you do this job, or why do you do this in your life? Why I have to earn my life, and this is something very respectful. And you finish yourself doing a job, even writing or doing films, that you can explain to everyone. I'm earning my life, but in the sense that I use it, it's like you have a life, and you have a life to live, and you have a life to spend, and a life to pass, and a life to use. But in a moment, you have to ask yourself if you have made something to earn this life, to have a merit to have that life, and to have the sense that you are not spending your life useless, but you are spending your life to do the things that makes you happy, the things that makes other people happy, the things that makes life a little bit stronger or acceptable to the others. And this is something very ridiculous. It doesn't have any sense of you have to become Barack Obama, or you have to become the inventor of the vaccines. No, it is more simple. You don't have to be a relevant person to have the feeling that you earned your life, that this gift of being alive is something that you earn by yourself, and that you can tell when the moment arrives to abandon this planet, just to say to yourself, okay, it was worthy, and I think it was fine for me, and that's my sense of.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely interpretation. I really enjoyed it. Listen, I could talk to you all day, but we just have to finish with one last question, and that is, what's next? What's on your artistic plate next? What are you working on?
Oh, I'm just I'm very happy because I just finished a novel, and it's going to be published in the 1st of September, so just after the summer in Spain. And it's a novel very different from Rolling Fields, because Rolling Field was published here 4 years ago in Spain, and this one is called Queridos Niños, it will translate as Dear Children.
Yeah,
or something like that. Yeah. And it is a reflection on the new politics, the politics that we are not only living but suffering in our days. And I think, again, the similarities between Ireland and Spain are very close, and I think we are all in the same terrible moment, that we have to decide if democracy can accept the real spirit of democracy, which is the respect for the people who lose these elections, the respect for the people that they don't think as you think, do. And the societies in their complexity. We are prepared to accept that, or we are becoming tyrants in the way we develop democracy. And it's a very fun novel, and again, I use the humor a lot, even in the title, and the irony, and the protagonist is a very, very strong and vicious and sometimes despicable character.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to understand their reasons. I try to understand why they behave like that.
Mm.
And I try to understand at the end of the novel what are the responsibilities as citizens,
Yeah.
and not only as electors
Sure.
and voters.
Yeah.
We need to go to vote with an idea of democracy in our mind. If not, we are destroying the most precious thing we have in the social organization, that is democracy.
Absolutely. I heard Elif Shafak, the Turkish novelist, speaking about this topic some time ago, and she said, we really need to remember that democracy is a very delicate flower.
Exactly.
And I think she's absolutely right. David, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you this evening.
Yeah,
and one of the things I'm really looking forward to, actually, because I think even the title of it is such a wonderful tribute to your parents and to your home. I'm looking forward to going back to your first novel, which you called Abierta toda la noche, because you say home is the only place that's open all hours. And I think that's a lovely concept for us to finish on. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
And so again, thank you to David, thank you to you, the audience, and a special thanks to Dublin UNESCO City of Literature for its support. If you enjoyed this conversation, you're invited to watch more events on the Irish, Spanish and Latin American literature, culture and the arts on the Instituto Cervantes Dublin YouTube channel. Follow the Instituto on social media and YouTube and browse the events at dublin.cervantes.es. Thank you very much. Goodbye, David. Thank you again.
Goodbye, Catherine. Thank you.
RTE supporting the arts.
Supporting artists.
Supporting us.